Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Friday to you. We finally made it to the weekend. I know when it comes to tropical weather, we started out the week with thinking, boy, this is going to be a nice, quiet week. And of course, things like to change every once in a while. It's, one of those things when we do in meteorology as we're trying to predict basically an atmosphere that flows like liquid that goes over oceans and through different terrains, all on a giant sphere that's spinning at 1,000 miles per hour and hurtling through space at a million or so miles an hour or so. So sometimes things do change when the world spins around and our atmosphere starts to get mixed up. So this time around, we started out with what we thought was going to be a quiet week, and we're finishing this week with what is turning out to be quite the busy week. And it looks like this weekend and next week might get even busier. I want to start out locally, though, here real quick as we kind of take a look at the radar. We've had some scattered showers and thunderstorms out there during the morning hours with a bit of a boundary that's in place right now. Most of the rain is out here to the west. Unfortunately, this is an area that got hit pretty hard with some heavy rains earlier today, but I would expect some additional development to take place over the course of the day as the daytime heating starts to kick in. So keeping that rain chance today at about 60%. Well, before we get to all of the busyness that we have in the hurricane world this time around, and I know there isn't anything really threatening, and sometimes folks want to know why we're focusing on something that's 18, 19, 2,000 miles away. Well, this is called Let's Talk Tropics, and regardless if anything is coming toward Louisiana or is way out in the Atlantic Ocean, this is a discussion about tropical weather no matter where it is. So actually, it's kind of a good thing that we've got a few things out there to talk about. Otherwise, this live stream would be quite boring. So I want to talk about the progression of a normal hurricane season. And usually we have our first named system by June the 20th. And we had Alberto, a week and a half ago or so, that made its way into the Bay of Campeche and worked its way off to the west. But we normally don't get our first hurricane until about August 11th. And our first major hurricane usually rolls around by September 1st. Now remember, this is an average season, and we haven't seen a whole lot of average stuff when it comes to weather over the last several years. But usually by July 17th is when we get named storm number 2, and I think we're going to end up being ahead of schedule here before the weekend is over because of a pretty significant looking tropical wave that has a very good chance for development. And that's what the National Hurricane Center has been watching here, and you can see you've got our initial disturbance 94L that is still currently over the western part of the Caribbean Sea and might make its way into the Bay of Campeche. This one doesn't have a very good chance, although the National Hurricane Center is up the chance to 30% from 20% yesterday. So the thinking might be we still could get some development there. And then out here in the Atlantic, you've actually got two different systems, one that's got a 90% chance for development and one farther to the east that has about a 20% chance for development. So there is quite a bit to talk about out there, and as we look at the eastern Atlantic, you can see that disturbance 95L, which is out here in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, is starting to look a little bit more like an actual tropical system. It's still considered a tropical wave or a disturbance, with a low pressure area developing along that, but it is starting to get its formation a little bit. The Coriolis effect having a little bit of pull on there, so you're starting to see that little bit of spin. Meanwhile, you've got another tropical wave right back in here that's kind of following in its footsteps, and I'll tell you, some of the computer models are picking up on this one as well, and you got another one coming off the African coast. So when we look at the tropical satellite for the Atlantic Ocean, I'll tell you, when I look at this here with a tropical wave here and a disturbance here and a disturbance over here, this tends to look a lot more what we would see during the month of August. So like we were talking about in the progression of hurricane season, after this weekend, I think we're probably going to be ahead of schedule. But just looking at this satellite picture, this is more reminiscent of what we would see during the month of August, with a number of tropical systems trying to form all at the same time. So let's focus in on disturbance 95L. This is the one That's about 1,800 miles or so east of the Leeward and Windward Islands. And just to kind of give you an idea of how far 1,800 miles is, that's like from here to San Francisco. So it's a long way, and it's a long way out. But I can tell you, the folks that live on the Windward Islands and the Leeward Islands are very aware of this tropical system as hurricanes come across there, and those islands are kind of like sitting ducks. So most folks that are out there are putting their hurricane plans in place, and as I've said here along the Gulf Coast, we don't have much going on, but there are a number of things that you can do when we don't have anything threatening us. But looking at the model intensity guidance, so what we were looking at on that earlier graphic was the number of hurricane models and the track. And in fact, I'm just going to go back to this one here for just a second. The model track forecast, as you can see, everything's pretty much lined up with basically a west-northwesterly flow with this. And the reason is you got a big ridge of high pressure that's out over the Atlantic Ocean. So that is going to be shoving basically everything off toward the west-northwest. So really, there's not a whole lot of question on where this thing is going to go over the next 5 to 6 days. And I will tell you that track forecasts are way easier to do than intensity forecasts. And the intensity forecast models were all over the place yesterday. Remember, on this side, this is where our wind speed goes up. Tropical storm, Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, and well, Cat 4 would be back here behind the tidal there. And then down at the bottom is the forecast hours. So you got day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and day 7 on there. So you can see that virtually all of the models here within the next 24 hours are bringing this to a named storm. And if it would get the name would be Beryl right there, the second name on the list. Then as you start to get into the 3-day period, you can see the majority of the hurricane models are going with a Category 1, maybe a Category 2 hurricane, and that extends all the way into day 5, which is over here, and then you start to see a little bit of a drop-off. But even in day 6 and day 7, the number of those longer range hurricane models are still keeping this system as at least a Category 1 hurricane. So some of them going with major hurricanes, most of them Cat 1, Cat 2. Yesterday, this particular model here was going with nearly a Cat 5, while this one over here was basically dumping this as a tropical depression after about day 3 to 3.5. So even though there's still a pretty big spread on the intensity models, they have come into closer agreement compared to what we were seeing yesterday. So let's zoom in on a couple of areas here, and we're going to focus on just the GFS model, and this is where the GFS specifically is focusing on a tropical system, not necessarily the whole global outreach of fronts and everything else that's around there. So it's zeroing in on this, and I'm putting together the forecast for midday Monday, kind of like what we did yesterday. We just kind of pulled this out to Monday to see if there was consistency between the different models and within the same model. And I will tell you that yesterday's GFS looked almost identical to this. And just to put it into perspective, you've got Trinidad down here, Trinidad, Tobago, you've got Barbados over here, you've got some of the Leeward and Windward Islands, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Guadeloupe, Dominica, as well as Martinique. So those are all of your outer islands, and the Caribbean over here with the Atlantic over here. So you can see that 979, that's actually running into Category 1 hurricane, maybe borderline Category 2 hurricane according to the GFS. The Euro model, on the other hand, is virtually the same when it comes to location. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there are your islands right there. Trinidad, Barbados out here. So a little bit faster than the GFS, but you'll also notice that the pressure there is only 1,000 millibars. So that would be maybe more tropical depression, borderline tropical storm. And then you've got the HWRF. By the way, if you didn't know, HWRF stands for Hurricane Weather Research Forecast System. So again, this is another hurricane-specific model. It only zeroes in on the numbers when it comes to a developing or a current tropical system. And this one is, what's that, 969 it looks like. So you're talking about Category 2, which would be very similar to what the GFS has. Barbados over here, and then the rest of the Leeward Islands over here, Leeward and Windward Islands. So this one may be a little bit slower than the GFS and the Euro. Remember, they had the system over here and maybe in this area here. And the HWRF model was actually running quite a a bit slower yesterday than the other two models, but it does seem to be catching up. But if you want to look at consistency, the GFS, the Euro, and the HWRF all are pretty much consistent with what they had here 24 hours ago. And then when it comes to comparing the three models, they're all virtually talking about a tropical system in the same place. It's just the intensity that's a little bit different, with the GFS and the HWRF considering a stronger system versus the Euro, which intends to go with a weaker system. But I will tell you, the GFS compared to the Euro, the GFS is a lot more optimistic or more aggressive when it comes to developing tropical systems than the Euro is. The Euro tends to be a little bit more conservative on there. So seeing the GFS stronger than the Euro is something that we normally see anyway. So you really can't rule out what's going to happen there. And we've got a number of days to watch this. Fortunately for the folks on the islands, they've got about 2 to 3 days to get prepared for this. Now, there are some things that are going against the tropical systems, and we're going to get to 94L, the one that's out here over the Western Caribbean here in just a little bit. But you can see there's a lot of Saharan dust, and this is also dry air that's represented in this particular forecast. So you got your other tropical wave here, you've got 95L here. So there is dry air and Saharan dust that's north of that area. If it can kind of squeeze its way south, it'll have a pretty decent chance for some development. And then there's less dry air and less less Saharan dust rather, as you get off toward the west. Wind shear is another thing that tends to inhibit development, and the reason is if you get that low-level circulation there at the surface, as the thunderstorms try to build around that center of low pressure, the higher those thunderstorms go in the atmosphere, the better chance they're going to start to encounter some stronger winds, maybe in the mid-levels. So what happens is when you get let's say a developing tropical system, let's say this is the low in the middle of the eye of the hurricane, but when you get those strong winds that are blowing across the top of it, it tends to kill the top part of the hurricane and prevents development. So what you want is low wind shear, and red indicates high wind shear on this map, and blue and nothing represents lower wind shear. So our 95L is right here, and it seems to be in an area of lower wind shear. Your next disturbance also might have some lower wind shear to work with as it works off toward the west, but you can see there's a lot of wind shear out here as you approach the Leeward and Windward Islands. But let's fast forward to the forecast for Monday, which is the same time that we had the other models to compare, which was Monday of next week. So this is the GFS. You can see there is a low pressure area here over the Windward Islands, and it is in a moderate shear atmosphere, maybe low to moderate. So that would give it a chance for some development. And then it looks like the wind shear is starting to weaken somewhat over the central and western part of the Caribbean. If that would be a trend, you could see a better chance for a strong system in the eastern and central part of the Caribbean Sea. And the reason is because the water temperatures are so incredibly warm. Everywhere in the Gulf, the Caribbean, the Western Atlantic, Eastern Caribbean, as well as the development area of the Central Atlantic are all showing water temperatures that are warm enough to sustain tropical systems. And then the tropical cyclone heat potential, which is actually what worries me a lot more when it comes to where these systems are developing and where they're going. Remember, 95L is out here. You got high heat content here. You've got high heat content going through the islands, and then it gets even higher as you get into the western part of the Caribbean. And what this is measuring is not just the water temperature at the surface, but how deep 80-degree water goes, because the deeper it goes, the more these tropical systems move over these waters, they do churn up water from below. And if they continue to churn up 80-degree water, they can feed off of that. And a lot of times you'll get some rapid intensification. So just like what we saw back in 2005 and back in 2020 as well, you got the loop current in the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico with high heat content. We had rapid intensification of a number of tropical systems and hurricanes. And the same thing could happen here here over the western part of the Caribbean. And I will tell you, one of the models has about the one that has the Category 4 status has it right about there, just south of Jamaica, which would be in that high heat content environment. So there's a lot going on with this, and I really think with the wind shear as well as the Saharan dust that would inhibit this system, but I don't think it's going to be enough to overcome development with 95L. And I really believe that we're going to have a tropical storm barrel, if not hurricane barrel, here as we get into the weekend and the early part of next week. So let's focus on what's closer to home. And this is 95L, and it is starting to look maybe a little better organized. There's a low pressure area right about in here. There's a lot of thunderstorm activity off to the east of it that's starting to pull in some thunderstorm activity to the south, but not really wrapping around. And it is going to be starting to encounter land. So I do think it's going to have to really get its act together here in the next 24 hours, because after that, it's going to be interacting with the Yucatan Peninsula. But there is a chance that we could see that go ahead and crossing the Yucatan Peninsula, and most of our hurricane models are showing this in about 2 days. So maybe on Sunday, we might have a tropical depression forming here over the Bay of Campeche and then continuing to move into Mexico. As you can see, Louisiana is way up here and is out of the way. Now, do keep in mind that we did have Alberto in this particular area, and it was a large sloshy storm, and we had some really high tides that occurred here along the Louisiana and Texas Gulf Coast. Not knowing if that's going to happen again, but that is something that you need to watch out for, especially if you live in Cameron Parish, or perhaps you live down towards Burns Point and St. Mary, or maybe Sycamore Point over there in Vermilion and Iberia Parish, or rather Iberia and St. Mary Parish. And we did have flooding over around Grand Island. There's a lot of folks that like to go in that direction this time of the year to do some fishing. So do keep that in mind over the weekend if you're going to be traveling down there. I will show you, though, the intensity models. Again, you can see where the wind speeds are here, and the timeline is down here. And it looks like going 2 to maybe 3 days out, some of the models are getting us up to a tropical storm. Perhaps that could be Beryl or Chris, whichever one gets the name first, but you can see that the bulk of the hurricane models are staying down here in tropical depression or lower status. So not real excited about this one, other than the fact that it's going to be bringing some moderate to heavy rains over parts of the Central American Peninsula and the Yucatan as well. Looking at the Gulf of Mexico, nothing going on here. We've got some showers and thunderstorms here on shore of Louisiana, but the rest of the Gulf of Mexico is looking pretty quiet right now. And I did want to point out one other thing here as we look at the Pacific Ocean as well. Pacific hurricane season starts on May 15th, so a little earlier than the Atlantic hurricane season. And so far, we've seen no activity whatsoever on the west side here. So that's an indication of a La Nina period. You get less storms over the Pacific, and you tend to get more than average storms on the Atlantic side. So could this be a sign of that La Nina pattern? Possibly, because it is pretty unusual to start going into July without any Pacific hurricanes. Now, I've given you this graphic here over and over and over and over again since the beginning of hurricane season. And this was coming out of the severe weather that we had during the month of May, where many of you got caught with your pants down without any flashlights or batteries when the power went out from some of those severe thunderstorms. So even though I put this list up here, there are 15 different groups of items that are on this particular list. And there's nothing that's threatening the Acadiana area right now. And I've been telling you, go ahead and get all these things together if you can. I know that's easier said than done. I'm the same way. I'm a procrastinator sometimes too. But I'm just going to issue a challenge to all of those and try to get 5. Just get 5 of these things over the weekend if you can. Pick the 5 easiest, pick the 5 hardest. I don't care. But if you can, just try to be hurricane ready. And if you can't do this entire list before the weekend is over, try to do at least a third of it, 5. And Donna, I see your chat, your comment down there, wondering to know if this high pressure area is going to keep these tropical systems down to the south. And yeah, I really do think that's what it's going to do. And that's pretty much the reason why we're seeing the hurricane models lining up like this. So that huge ridge of high pressure that is over the Atlantic Ocean, that is what is going to steer these. Now, if something were to develop a little bit farther farther to the north, maybe north of Puerto Rico in that particular area, it would tend to curve maybe toward the United States, perhaps the East Coast. But with this so far to the south, Donna, I do think that this is just going to continue on a westward track. So as of now, we are not worried about it. But again, as I've said, go ahead and get your plan in place when you can. And like I said, I'm challenging everybody to grab 5 of these 15 groups of items here before the weekend is over. Well, I hope you have a great weekend. Hopefully these showers, I don't know about you, I'm kind of digging some of the showers and thunderstorms here because it does tend to keep it a little bit cooler. And I don't know, I'm one of these morning guys who, really cherishes my early afternoons. And boy, I'll tell you what, sometimes a little rolling thunder and a good downpour can set you up for a really, really nice nap to lead you into the weekend. Well, for all of you that have joined Acadiana Weather today and are here on Let's Talk Tropics, I really appreciate you joining us for these midday chats. And for all of you who have subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for being interested. And make sure you tell your friends, because if you like what's going on here, I'll be here through the hurricane season. I live here in Lafayette, Louisiana, so I am forecasting weather specifically for you that live here. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you have a great weekend. I will probably see you on social media here and there with updates on any tropical weather that forms Saturday and Sunday. Other than that, on YouTube, I will probably see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.